Welcome in. Here we go. It's the first day of May, and we're all set to go with Now and Next. We've got the cast here, and they are our comms and strategy team, and we will want to get to that. I've got the Leaf hat on. We know that Lindsay Broadhead is going to wear her emotions on her sleeve literally today as we head into the Battle of Ontario tonight. But I just want to tell you, before we get into the conversation here on the podcast, we had the Battle of Ontario this week on the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. It was just this wow, spirited, fiery debate. Probably understates how things went with Tim Hudak, Kathleen Wynne, John Wright, and moi. And we got into some of the issues. And one of the ones that really lit it up was Doug Ford's conversation around and rant. It wasn't really a conversation. It was just a rant about electing judges. So highly encourage you to slip into On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast, and put an ear on that. And for those of you who depend on hearing that on the radio, there's no guarantee you'll hear that segment on the radio, because that's an edited version that ends up on the radio. And this went way longer than anything that we would be allowed to talk about on the radio. So On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. All right, around the table today, Anne-Marie Aikins is here from AMA Communications. Lindsay Broadhead, wearing the C on the Leaf jersey. Oh, Wendell. All right, there we go. All about that. They could have used a little Wendell the other night. And Bob Reid is here from Broadway Strategy. I said off the top, just before we got on the air, it was a week of anxiety. And Bob, election night to me, it was the whole day, for whatever reason, just seemed to stall. Everything was in slow motion. It was weird. Maybe that's a throwback to the days when I was, working in the newsroom. I just can't shake that. It just felt like such a quiet day. What the hell's going to happen? And you don't know anything until 10:30 at night. So it was a lost day for me, but a late night. And then there was the Leafs, another late night. And, I made the mistake of hanging in there for the Canadians last night. So, and then here we are with the Leafs and tonight. So it's just I don't know if my level of anxiety is worrying about finishing the series or actually watching what was coming in on the returns for the federal election. But it was a weird week.
You need a vacation from the sounds of it. Take some time off, man.
Got to talk to the boss about that. But I don't know. Somebody said to me, I wouldn't care so much about this federal election because normally I don't give a shit.
Well, you hit on it with the what the hell's going to happen question. And I think that's what made it such an unusual election, because usually we know how things are probably going to play out, and they do, and they count the seats and off we go. But this one was so close, dramatically close. When you look at the big picture numbers, when you look at the popular vote, when you look at the seat count, I mean, it was close all the way around, and literally could have gone either way, not any way, but either way. And so that's why I think we were all sort of on the edge of the seat.
Yeah, it was interesting, Lindsay. One of the first things that I was getting texted about, and I mentioned this to John Wright the morning after the election, all the pollsters got it wrong. Well, they really didn't. I mean, everybody kind of misunderstood the real strength of the Conservatives in Ontario. But to Bob's point, nationally, the numbers were bang on. Regionally, with the exception of Ontario, they were pretty close, even with the seat projections. But it's funny to me that the fight in Ontario was so underestimated, was so understated, and that's why the Conservatives did as well as they did.
Yeah, it's interesting, and even when you touch on Kathleen and Tim, I mean, I have such great respect for both of them. Tim was a client at one point, and Kathleen has always been someone that I regret not having the opportunity to work for. Someone that you could learn so much from. But they're these incredible pillars of view and opinion. And because they comment often, I think we get to know them a little bit. And they're representative of, I think, a lot of what's going on. I mean, unlike so many other elections, there is a lot at stake right now. and emotions are running high, and people are divided, right? And I think we saw that in all areas of Canada, and it's been commented on widely that, you couldn't use old systems or metrics to determine how, broad provinces would vote. It's really quite microcosms of demographics, and that's what we saw in Ontario. So it's, in hindsight, everything's quite easy to understand. But with the level of division, rootedness that folks are feeling, and weird cross sections of population that we haven't seen before, divided on gender, age, societal place, urban, rural. That's what we saw play out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Anne-Marie, the interesting part for me is that, we've thrown the phrase around tribalism and that you're in this tribe and that tribe. And to some degree, it's sort of been this anthropological look at how we politically carve ourselves out in terms of where we live. But increasingly, that language has become darker, as we get further into it. And here's an example. Two things I heard. I think it was Jen Gerson on. She's one of the editors at The Line, and she posted a piece, and it was about what to expect in the election. This was pre-election, but about a third of her piece was a rant against boomers and how the boomer was responsible for, making sure the boomers take care of themselves, and we're going to leave everything, like scorched earth behind us for the rest of the country. And I appreciate, and on the one hand, she's saying not any one individual boomer, but okay. But it's easy to dismiss that, but at the same time, understanding that, okay, somebody's down the rabbit hole so far as the boomers aren't the reason that we're in the problem that we're in. This is a broader place. But back to my point about tribalism. Mm-hmm. We find kind of any shelter from the storm, if you will, and we're willing to cling to it. And part of that is on social media. And I'll give you an example. There's a guy I've known for a long time who's in broadcasting. I wouldn't say we're friends, and I don't say that to be disparaging. I just don't know him that well to be a friend, but we're colleagues and we know each other from that perspective fairly well. Eric Thomas was a long time in this market here in Toronto. And the morning after the election on Facebook, he posted, paraphrasing, but here's the intention. Canadian voters have proven to be as stupid as American voters. And then just went off on a rant about now you can expect this, that, and the other thing from the elite who are going to rob us blind, and went on about the taxes that we can expect the Carney government to drill down on and how we're going to bankrupt everybody. My answer back to Eric was, thanks for the rational, thoughtful analysis. You managed to do all that without using the word woke, DEI, or, you didn't bring up the World Economic Forum. So good on you. His answer was not, fuck you, or to engage in conversation. He just blocked me. He created his own algorithm in that respect and didn't want to hear what I had to say, whether it was tongue in cheek or not. But that's where we are. There's a real bitterness about that. And that's what worries me most, is that people who otherwise are thoughtful, and I know to be thoughtful about this, are shutting out the other side of the conversation. We can't blame the algorithm at Facebook or X or anywhere else. We're beginning to do that on our own.
Well, that didn't come just naturally. It did come naturally. It came, but the younger generation, often the younger generation, and I was fascinated by how they voted. So many of under 30s voted conservative. So, and many of them were originally in their early voting days voting NDP. So it just doesn't even seem to make sense to me. But I think a couple of things happened. The really younger cohort experienced COVID like we didn't experience COVID. They were very formative years that they grew up in COVID and isolated, and it drove them online. And that's where they predominantly, and this is a generalization, get their news. And the news online is very polarizing, and it's very headline driven and scandal driven, and the way Polyev ran his entire, the last 2 years was all about the, axe the tax. It's a 3 word slogans. And that's where they got their news. And the carbon tax is coming back. And I heard all of that, all of these kind of conspiracies that where they get their news. And that has driven them, many of them voted conservative this year, because they really do look at the boomer generation to go, you really fucked it for me. I cannot afford to buy a house ever. Like, I don't really have any hope of doing that. I cannot even afford rent. And I have a good job. I'm in the service industry. I'm in the service industry. I mean, people that take care of us. They're nurses. They're police officers. Those people with good paying jobs that normally, when I was that age and got that kind of a job, I was able to afford a home. You could get a down payment. There were government programs to help, and that we stopped doing that. We stopped building housing. They just don't. They feel very disenfranchised, I think is the word I'm looking for. Really disenfranchised from the rest of us. And they blame the rest of us for this predicament. And in many ways, that is kind of true. We didn't look out for them, and we didn't pay attention to what was happening during COVID because we all got very insulated. And that we have to pay particular attention to our young people under 30, that it's a significant population that, one, they voted, so that's good. But 2, they're getting misinformed through social media because they aren't getting full stories. They aren't getting the background, the context, all of those kinds of things. And we have to do something about making life affordable for them. Or we really risk all of our futures.
Except, Bob, I think in this case, what I'm suggesting is that it's not necessarily just the social media platform that is being selective about what I hear and see. I am so fed up and I'm tired and I'm anxious that I don't want to hear what you have to say, Bob, because you disagree with me. So bugger off.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Right.
Which I think is a function of the rise of social media and
Entirely.
of the echo chambers and all of that. This is how it's manifesting now in individual human behavior and interaction. We don't have to fight from behind a keyboard anymore anonymously, which is really a shame. And I think you're right that there's such a lack of appetite for alternative points of view or rational discussion, rather than, as you said, we disagree, so screw you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, here's the issue I've got with all of this, Lindsay, as if it's not bad enough, but each one of the major parties built a platform based on, and I would say, rear view mirror perceptions and conceptions of what those demographics were and how they were supposed to behave, right? I mean, whether it was the Liberals completely losing that youth vote or the under 35 vote to the Conservatives, or however that flipped, they might have said that out loud. And again, the Conservatives had issues because they didn't pay attention to what was going on with the boomers, those whom they would normally have had in their stable. And the NDP, I don't know where they are in terms of their relationship with the electorate generally. But they all went into the campaign as if nothing had changed. They all went into that campaign and suffered from it to some degree because they assumed that nothing had changed, or their posture was that nothing had changed. And they only paid lip service in many respects. So, yes, they got a great turnout and vote for Conservatives, but they still didn't form a government because the bells they were ringing didn't resonate with a broad enough group to put them in office.
Well, and it was more than the older generation that they forgot about. Women did not connect to that campaign at all. They made incredible inroads. And I'm still scratching my head. Like, I think so much happened behind the scenes of that particular campaign that, we'll learn more about in the coming weeks. But the failure of the leadership And I say that only because everything I understand is that Mr. Poilievre took an unusual leadership position in communications for that particular campaign. So his failure to early on, like in the Trudeau era, to make himself more palatable to a broader audience is troubling and a bit of a head scratcher to me. Whereas the Carney campaign, I'd liken it to he got the job before he's completed the interview process, so we'll see. I'm very optimistic and hopeful because he's our prime minister and I hope it lands. But where their campaign was very successful was bringing back the old school cohorts of people that would traditionally be liberal, but who they forgot. Who they left behind in the Trudeau era. He flipped that very, very quickly. So it's hard to delineate. It became a 2-horse race. The Tories captured the young generation. Their numbers are outstanding, but both parties failed to listen to areas of the country who are screaming to say, look at us, hear us out, listen to us. And that's kind of a broader metaphor for everything we're talking about right now, but also what needs to happen next. We need to unify this country. We need to listen to people who are speaking, and we shouldn't always listen to the divisive leaders of whether they're premiers or from organizations or whatever they are from. We shouldn't always listen just to them, but we have to understand what's brewing underneath the surface and motivating those emotions that you're talking about, so that you just don't flip off and say, to your point, screw this, I'm out. I need to listen.
So, Bob, where does that leave the NDP? And I realize, people are going to historically say, yeah, there's been points where, they've had this drops and that they've lost official party status in the past. But this was such a pronounced division between liberals and conservatives, and there was no room for NDP. And I'm sure each one of you is hearing already from people who are in the know and saying, this NDP candidate's ready to walk across and join Team Carney. I just don't have the appetite to be sitting in the minivan caucus for the NDP for the next 4 years. And that's one thing. But the brand of the NDP has been so badly damaged. To have somebody resurrected back to what it was under Jack Layton, that's generational at this stage.
Yeah, and a generational challenge. What led to it? I think it was a couple of things. I think the Jagmeet Singh support for the Liberals and that agreement that they had with them, and always preventing any real action against the Trudeau government by bolstering them, by supporting them. I think that took a toll in a couple of ways. One, among New Democrats who weren't happy about that and who wanted to take a harder line against the Liberal government. I think when presented with a choice in this most recent election, do you want to continue to support, the third party like that, or do you just go ahead and vote Liberal because that's where things are going to end up anyway if that dance continues? And the last tranche of it, I think, was very strategic in that a lot of New Democrats were terrified at the prospect of a Poilievre government and were prepared to abandon their party and to strategically vote Liberal to try and stop that. So I think it was a mix of several things at play there.
Well, here's the issue for me, though, when we start talking about strategic voting, Anne-Marie, the only people who are strategic voters are soft NDP voters. Like, you never talk about Liberal voters who are strategic voters or conservatives who are strategic. It's always the NDP. And I facetiously asked the other day, how long can New Democrats be new? They were founded like 60 years ago. Isn't it time for a reset for this party? If in fact there is room on the left for another party, Doesn't somebody have to emerge to the equivalent of the Preston Manning reform on the left if you're really going to have an impact and say, okay, here's where we are and here's what we are?
Yeah, rebranding a party, I'm not an expert in that, is really exceptionally difficult. But you're right. Now, the NDP really did seem to move far away from their roots of the far left, the human rights, the union. You know, that image that they encapsulated of the NDPers of old days. That there was a decade where that's who I supported, because they really did capture a human rights position. But I think if we want to say that the NDP have really lost their way and they're just kind of no hope for them, look at the Liberals just 3 months ago. We thought the same about them, that they were like, nothing short of rebranding them would ever allow them to really kind of move on. And now they're our government at this point, although a minority government. And I think the change in leadership, to me, whether it's an organization or it's a party, means everything. And it has to be a leader that really people resonate with, people are inspired by, or people, even if it's inspired like Pierre Poilievre did, he's a really good leader in that way. He inspired his base to be really pissed off and angry and motivated in that way. You know, maybe we don't agree with it. Many of us don't agree with that, and how polarizing he was and reminded us of Trump and so forth. But he was a really good leader, because that's what leaders do. And but is it the leader the Conservatives need right now? That's another whole argument of whether or not he is the Prime Minister, if he's prime ministerial. That's, I think, what people had trouble with. You know, they were great at him leading them, making them pissed off and motivated, but are they good at him being a prime minister and representing the country and so forth, especially at this critical time? So, but Carney came in and really did inspire that kind of trust, that faith that he could lead Canada and protect our sovereignty and lead us against Trump in this particular situation. If he had come on board, if Trudeau had stepped down 6 months ago, I don't know. It's really difficult to speculate. Would there have been a change, and would he still have been elected today? But so I think rather than rebranding the NDP, have to really think about who they are. I'm not kind of fussed if it still says new. Many things still say new, even though they're old. But they need to really think about their leader.
Well, here's the difference, though, for me, Lindsay, here is, yes, the Liberals were in the toilet, at Christmas and New Year's. That was the consideration. But the difference was the Liberal brand in and of itself was strong. The Liberal core vote in and of itself was very strong. The people who were moving away from the Liberals were moving away from Justin Trudeau, right? And the people who were moving away from the NDP were moving away for fear of something else, not because they thought that the NDP stood for something in terms of the value, the political values that they adhere to, that was going to make the country move forward in any direction. So I dare anybody to tell me what defined the NDP core right now, because if they don't have one, this is not a matter of rebranding. It's a matter of breaking it and starting over.
Just because I'm competitive and I want to go neck and neck with Tim and Kathleen and whatever happened on the other course, I'll take a different path. I don't know if you're right, and it's because the NDP, prior to Trudeau, his epic demise, they were very successful at playing the game, playing the house, and getting incredible things pushed through that, let's admit it, were their idea. So they played the game of the third party well. You can argue all these different things. The Tories put a bucket ton of money behind kind of slandering Singh's reputation, affiliating him with Rolex and high-end, Italian leather and suits and things. And the purpose, right? Just like an organization, you can have a brand, but you need a purpose. And without one, you're going to be a failing brand. The same is true for a party, right? That's what began to weaken. I don't know if Trudeau was the only problem with the Liberal Party. Certainly, we've learned he was central to it. But remember, a lot of the conversations, even amongst Liberals, were, what does this party stand for anymore, right? And then you could extend it even over to the Tory side of the house when, its tent was getting so big that it was going maybe a little too right for the fiscally conservative Tories, but people who were a little bit more red in their heart. It was an uncomfortable tent for some. So in a weird way, I think all three parties need to find that out. The Liberals were given a gift because they were able to redefine themselves based on the mission critical state of the day and the very unique nature of Mr. Carney. But otherwise, I think all three parties are somewhat rudderless. And again, this attaches to a lot of the themes that we're seeing internationally in Western economies, where centrist left-leaning parties they've lost their way and they're trying to figure out how to sort through being economically viable, but also capturing what is like a huge immigrant population set of issues, huge social justice set of issues. Those are hard things to straddle. So look, if Wab Kinew came in, I don't know if that's feasible. That's a saving grace for that party. If another incredible leader came in, the NDP, I think, could actually buckle up and redefine themselves. I'm keeping my mind open.
Well, Bob, the what Lindsay has defined, though, is exactly what we saw in this election, where it came down to personalities. It came down to whether you liked the guy or not, whether you thought they had the chops to get the job done. Because, I heard from John Wright, and he was saying, he quoted Lisa Raitt going door to door last week. And she said she would get to the door and somebody would say, I really like the Conservative platform and I would vote for it if Mark Carney were the guy pitching it. So it wasn't about policy anymore. It wasn't about what political stripe. It really was about, do I like this guy?
Yeah. Yeah. And the ongoing analysis points to Poilievre's unfavorability factor that never got high, that never got as high as the party vote did. That became an ongoing thing. And I think ultimately that will be the question mark over his continued leadership. Like it's a really interesting aftermath for the Conservatives because on paper they did great. You can't argue with the numbers in terms of the growth in seats and the percentage of the popular vote and areas where they won seats that had been off the chart before. All of that was great, and it's the strongest performance again on paper since Stephen Harper, or even in some cases Mulroney, the way depending on how you parse the numbers. But it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like it was a great campaign for the Conservatives. It doesn't feel like, man, we're on the precipice and next time for sure. It doesn't feel that way. And I think it comes down to, again, question marks around people's comfort level with Pierre Poilievre as a potential next prime minister. And those tires were kicked hard in this vote. And clearly, Carney was the preference. I think the Liberals nailed the ballot question. Who do you have greater confidence in to lead this country in dealing with Donald Trump? And by all measures, and including the result, Carney came out on top of that. So now he's got a real challenge, and it's coming fast. The wheels are in motion for the meeting with Donald Trump. He's going to go to Washington. They're going to meet in the White House. So he's got a tall order now. Okay, you campaigned to get this job as being the guy who could deliver the best results. Now he's got to deliver results. The expectations are going to be tremendous going into that. And I think the real challenge for Carney is going to be to to manage those expectations and yet make some clear progress. Because if he comes out of that meeting with absolutely nothing, with nothing to point to, with no major change in direction on, you know, the headbutting that's going on between the two countries right now, he's doomed. But at the same time, realistically, I don't think he can come out of it with some kind of magic victory. So my expectation and my recommendation, if I was advising him, would be to focus on process, to remind people or emphasize to people that this is a process. This whole thing is not going to get solved in one meeting in the short term. It's the beginning of a journey. It's the beginning of a process. And what he does need to come back from Washington with is some kind of roadmap. Okay, here's where things are going to unfold from here. Here's the roadmap that we've agreed to. Here's the process that we've agreed to. And now that process needs to unfold.
Yeah, to be fair, Lindsay, we haven't had a functioning federal government since, you know, the beginning of December. So, I mean, keeping that in mind, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and if you watch the House ever, God, months before that, like, what a disaster. Yeah. Yeah, Bob's right. There's, I don't know if process is the right word or not, but you know, it is going to be a journey. What scares the hell out of me is how much we can be puppeteered, and our media cycle can be puppeteered by Trump, right? He can decide, I'm going to play with this guy and not give him anything. And that will be a narrative. Or he can say, I'm going to give him a win today, and that will be the narrative. I think for Carney, he should lean in on the things that he can control. And the things that he can make quick, fast, meaningful decisions on that unite the country. Give Alberta a win. Give Saskatchewan a win. Give them a reason to believe that this guy is actually going to represent them well for the next 4 years, or some are saying year and a half, but you know what I mean, for the next term. Give Quebec a win. You know, find a way to put a cork in Blanchette, and make sure that all these premiers and his federal cohorts, or counterparts rather, lean in a little bit. So there's less divisive discussion and more unity. That has to happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. The whole question around what does he do first, and I realize that everybody's focused south of the border, Anne-Marie, his main strategy has to be, Western Canada, Quebec, in that order, I would say, in that respect. What I'll be really interested in to see is how the provincial and territorial governments respond to his legislation to have interprovincial trade barriers broken down fundamentally by July the 1st, and celebrate Canada Day that way. That's not that far away, right? It's 2 months.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Bob, that should be his priority about dealing with Trump, and I think that makes sense. But I think what he has to pivot to is because Trump may say one thing and then 6 hours later he takes it back. So you can't really depend on anything like that. But say we have a roadmap and this is a process. So I completely agree with that. But the next part is to say, work is underway on, that we have to focus on our own economy and not depend on the U.S. So we have to break those interprovincial barriers, build inroads with the West, and build coalitions right across Canada. I think he's got a big task on his hand. One of the things I'm really looking forward to is his cabinet posts, because his interim cabinet posts that he posts, there were things missing for me. There was no women's minister, and I like, who's looking after all of the women's ministries? Like, all of those ministries doesn't have a cabinet minister at this point. So who is he going to appoint? I need to see that. And I think you think very carefully about using that as an opportunity to build coalition as well, about representation across the country and so forth. And who knows what inroads he's going to make with, because he does need support from NDP, the one Green representative who's put out the olive branch already, and any other, he has to build inroads. So I wasn't even looking forward to them getting a majority by 3 more seats, because they would have had a razor thin majority. And then there would be this focus on how do you ensure that the Prime Minister is in the House for every other minister is in the House for every single solitary vote. That would be almost impossible. So this way he has to focus on building coalitions. So I think that should be a priority, and that would, hopefully reach out to people that did vote Conservative or didn't vote at all because they were feeling so betrayed or disenfranchised, or just didn't feel motivated at all. To realize, to feel like that he's going to represent all of their concerns right across the country.
Well, one of the areas where, and there's lots of them, where people will feel disenfranchised is the North. And a couple of weeks ago, I spent a few days up in Nunavut and in Iqaluit, and universally, it's interesting to hear how the Inuit and the North do not think north-south; they think east-west. Right? That's one part of Canada, is the Arctic and the Inuit and the indigenous peoples of the Arctic. In fact, I heard the premier of Nunavut this week talking about their close relationship with the Inuit in Greenland. So it was really interesting to see how that was playing out. But that's, low-hanging fruit. And to some degree, historically, we have the first prime minister born in the Arctic, elected to the prime minister in Canada. And we also have a governor general who is from the Arctic as well. So it's an interesting part of this conversation. And I say that because today we have launched our podcast. It's called The Arctic Edge. So if you want to drop in and put an ear on that, and you'll get a sense. And I think a lot of that conversation is going to be prominent in terms of mining, in terms of economic development, in terms of security and sovereignty. All of those things are going to be first and foremost. So plenty
very timely, I must say, Dave, because I just heard Election Canada is going to launch a study in why the voting turnout was so low in Nunavut that it was half the rest of the country, less than half.
Yeah. And they did have challenges, and so anyway, I think those things will be first and foremost. So it just can't be any one thing. I think that the opportunity or the challenge for this new government is that there's going to have to be this 360, almost spherical view of their approach and their strategies. Okay, here's what I want to do. This might be considered, a conversation that was sort of had last week, but it really did get lost in the maw. And considering everybody's experience just as commuters in this city, the city council made a big splash, and the mayor made a big splash by saying, we have the solution. We have the answer. We're going to solve congestion. And the way they're going to do that is we're going to appoint a czar, a traffic czar. Yes, one throat to choke is the secret sauce here.
One department, one person is in charge. If it doesn't work, you take the responsibility. Right now on congestion, it could be, it could be construction. It could be road pricing. It could be transportation. It could be procurement, because they are in charge of constructions too. And all of those elements, then it gets into different departments. So having a lead, a person in charge, which means that person will take the responsibility, and all bucks will stop at that person. As to who it is, I'll leave it for our city manager, Paul Johnson.
All bucks would stop there, Bob. What happened to the mayor's office? I mean, seriously.
What happened to the mayor's job?
Right?
Shouldn't the mayor be the czar when it comes to one of the fundamental issues at play in this city, and economically, the future of the city, everything ties in to congestion and mobility difficulties. So what an abdication of responsibility, because that clip sounded to me like the mayor saying, all of that stuff, not my department. I'm gonna set somebody up whose job it will be to take the blame.
Set somebody up to fail. Actually, what they're going to do.
Precisely. That's appalling. It really is.
Anne Marie, I that's the first thing I thought is this. Okay, the mayor's just given up her seat. I don't get this at all. I understand the populism behind it, but seriously, and council bought into it.
Yeah, what she should very much have done is because the recommendations are good. I'm hopeful about the recommendations with some major caveats, though, because many of the recommendations were recommended by the Toronto Region Board of Trade. So there's a basis for them. And it's going to take a multi-pronged strategy to deal with congestion at all. But what she missed saying is that a traffic czar would, or construction, whatever they're called, the czar, would report directly to her, and the buck falls there. What she just did this separation. Is this person, I have a person to fire if nothing changes 6 months from now. So that I was very disappointed in. But what I'm hopeful about appointing someone with really vast experience, and someone like a Kathleen Wynne that is great at, she's very good at big picture and looking at all kinds of different things all at the same time. Somebody that can really look at things very broadly and then dive into solutions for it. So, but the person can't just look at Toronto departments, because Toronto operates like a region. The people that are driving right today, if we look outside and you ask them where they come from, many of them don't live here at all. So it's not about Toronto. It's about they come from all over the region. And you have to look at all of the partners in that region, which are the Metrolinx and Go Transit. They do construction, as we know, all over this city. And if you're not coordinating with them closely, like you're coordinating with the Toronto construction departments, then you're going to miss out on a whole bit. All of the utility companies that Toronto doesn't own, you have to coordinate with all of the work they do. So there's a million partners, and we know how to do it because we did it during Pan Am. That was a requirement that John Tory, who was mayor at the time, required. And he was the chair. And he met every month prior to the Pan Am about how we were going to coordinate during Pan Am. So construction wasn't going to delay the athletes getting to the events because they had to go all over the place, all over the region, or the fans getting to and from all of the events like that. And we didn't have any major issues. We even had things that happened like fatalities that are inevitable on the Go Transit line. And that still didn't. We had a backup plan for them. We had strategies in place, but it took a major coordination of a whole bunch of people. But the buck stopped with John Tory. He took full responsibility and he reported on it regularly.
So best practices there. That's a good point, Lindsay. Just for the record there, I think Anne Marie rhymed off more organizations and groups that are involved in congestion than the mayor did in her clip. She mentioned 4 and kind of fudged around procurement. So it needs a bigger picture for sure. On the other hand, the Tory example around Pan Am was specifically around an event that was, over whatever it was, a 10 or 12 day period. And it meant that there was scheduling set to say, okay, we're going to stop and slow it down and phase it out, and then we'll get back to it after it's done. So I think that stop and start part of it is an important part of it. But yes, it can be done. The issue for me is that there doesn't seem to be any peripheral vision around this at all.
The entire issue makes me giggle a bit, just because, first of all, the name is ridiculous. Although I do love how Toronto names things, like the Nightmare is one of my favorite all-time names for a role, and only Toronto could have a nightmare. Look, I talk about leadership constantly, right? It's an area I'm sure, not uniquely, that you guys are. Communications people are obsessed with leadership because teams are inspired and enabled from the top, right? So the more clear a leader is, in direction, and also empowerment, the better their team is going to be and the better able they're going to be to act. So I'm going to leave it to listeners to determine who the leader is within Toronto, because there is a bureaucratic side and there is a political side. And I'll also leave it to people to decide whether staff are empowered or not. I do not work there, so I can't talk about the current culture in any way, shape, or form. What I can say is from my previous experience there, and also at the Toronto Region Board of Trade, and also working in corporate communications for over 20 years in terms of organizations that have had a direct handle on infrastructure builds and transit projects, Metrolinx, others. There is already a robust system that is supposed to connect projects, whether it's net new projects like FIFA that are on the horizon, when we know there's going to be far more people here with the Taylor Swift concert, etc., the police, their involvement, how public transit relates to digging up roads, the pipes, the water mains, all of these things. Those processes are already in place. So if what the mayor is saying is that that's not working, we need another layer of bureaucracy or someone in charge to get that done, as the Toronto Region Board of Trade has said for, I think, nearly a decade, right? Then that should be done. Because that's a gap within the system. The question is, will that person be enabled, empowered, and allowed to succeed on certain parameters, also so that the public knows there's no way they can solve congestion. You can't solve mass construction, public transit that isn't strong enough yet for our region that we're building, right? We need to have an adult conversation and stop passing bucks. We need to put the bucks in our pocket and save some bucks, and also spend the bucks in the right way, and empower all of our people to succeed, because there's brilliantly smart people working these files. We just need to empower them to do their job.
Well, if this was supposed to be an issue around accountability, Bob, it didn't occur to me that maybe we should call it the traffic Caesar or whatever where you want to go. They are going to have some teeth in their portfolio. I mean, they're going to have to hold everybody else's feet to the fire to make sure that when the mayor calls on them to report, here's the accomplishment, here's how we've managed this. But there's going to have to be a whip there as much as there is a carrot. One
would assume, but that wasn't made clear.
No.
Again, that's another fail on this whole announcement, if you can call it that.
And also, the city manager's not even reporting back until June.
Yeah.
Why not till June?
There's no rush.
No rush for it.
But this is exactly, like, it ties back to Mark Carney. It ties back to people's frustrations at the federal level and in the provincial level, right? I think people are absolutely frustrated with stuff not getting done, and there being so much lip service and battling back and forth. Like, at the end of the day, regardless of political stripe or level of government, people want to see their tax dollars spent well, so it's bettering their lives. End of story, right? And they want people who communicate in a clear, transparent, and honest way. We've talked about this on so many of our pods, right? And it just boggles my mind that, all of us keep saying this, and we know that the people who know it internally are muzzled, right? At every layer of government. So it's idiocy to me that that another system isn't in place where people can speak truth to power, can speak honestly about what's working, what's not, and also get stuff done. It blows my mind.
Well, and it does, and that's where that fatigue kicks in, and people, again, we go back to that. I'm tuning you out now. There's just no reason for me to, invest any kind of energy or expectation in any of this, and that's the hard part. But June soon comes, Anne-Marie, and we'll have it all solved by September. So
that's just all a report too, and then there's the summer, So
well, and that's what I heard the mayor say. But we'll get around to appointing somebody by September, right? And it's funny when I started to look up where can we find the details on this story. You just put in Toronto congestion. The stories are like 15 years old, and it's the same freaking story.
I know.
Right?
I vote for Anne-Marie Aikins as
there we go.
Aha.
Just so long as there's no conflict, we don't want to lose her on the podcast. So
Well,
there we go.
I have lots of whips too. So.
Well, all right.
Hey.
All right, let's leave that there, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with our comms and strategy team. Thanks to Lindsay Broadhead, Go Leafs, Anne-Marie Aikins, Bob Reid. I'm Dave Trafford. And by the way, if you're listening on Apple, iHeart, Spotify, make sure you hit the follow or subscribe button, as the case may be. A lot of people ask me, well, if I subscribe, does it cost money? No. It just means that it's attached to your app, and that when we actually drop a show in the app, you get a notification that says, by the way, the cast on Now and Next is ready to be heard by you. And the same thing on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. You get this show, Now and Next, and the Ontario Politics Podcast. And those notifications pop into your email as well. So thanks for doing that. Do enjoy your first weekend of May. We didn't get around to the blossoms, but I love that that's a Toronto story. We end up with the High Park cherry blossoms every year being the big story. And I'd say that not to be facetious, but given all the other bullshit we just talked about over the last hour, it's kind of nice that we kind of take a time to really literally and figuratively stop down to smell the flowers. So if you get a chance to do that this weekend, hurry up, because they don't last forever. All right, that'll do it. I'm Dave Trafford. It's Now and Next for Story Studio Network.